Social Media News Live. I'm so glad you're here. I've got some of my favorite guys in the studio, not with me, but virtually. And my friend Paul Gowder is back with us today, who is an amazing co-host and live streamer. We were talking a little bit in the pre-show room and the stuff he does. My gosh, go to powwows.com and see what he's doing because he is amazing. But also go to paulgowder.com because he's just an amazing dude. But anyway, we are so excited you're here. Make sure, when we're talking about live streaming, we're talking about podcasting today, make sure that you call in your friends who are interested about this. If they have questions or maybe they're thinking about starting a podcast or they're thinking about maybe doing a live stream or a podcast or maybe one together. Who knows? Anyway, ask them into this conversation. Call them in. Let them know that we're talking about that. And we'll try to answer as many questions as we can during the show today. Mr. Paul Gowder, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing fantastic. Thank you so much. Looking forward to talking to these guys. Met them at PodFest and excited to dig in and see how they do all this stuff.
Yeah, I'm hoping I'm I have to be on my best behavior because Chris and Jim are like remote producers and they like have their really high standards and like I have to convince them to come in. And I'm gonna hit the wrong button. I know it, so I'm not used to having 4 people on screen. But anyway,
listen, I'll say what you said. I think the first time we had you on our shows, you were just like, I'm just happy to show up and not have to push any buttons. So that's me and Jim today. We just get
it's weird. It's a weird feeling, isn't it? Like when you're like you don't have control. You're like, anyway. So. Hopefully we'll stay on topic, but so you guys are both from Atlanta, right? Like close to each other, or
yes, yeah, not too far. Like probably 40 minutes, and then in traffic, 38 hours. But
okay.
Yeah, not too far.
Atlanta traffic is a lot of fun. Yeah. We have our friend Connor Brown showing up. What's up, fellas? Looking forward to the show today. He's just mad because he's not in here and not able to ask all his Amazon questions to Chris and Jim. So we are going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to hit go on the podcast machine, and we will start the show. Hello, folks. Welcome to Social Media News Live. I'm Jeff C., and you're not.
And this is the show that keeps you up to date on what's happening in the world of social media and more.
Have you ever wondered how to bridge the gap between broadcasting and live streaming? Are you curious about how those two platforms can work together to maximize your reach? Or maybe you're looking to understand the unique benefits each one offers. Well, if those questions spark your interest, then you are in the right place. Today, we're excited to host 2 guests who have mastered this balance. They are the dynamic duo behind Dealcasters, a brand that has successfully harnessed the power of both podcasting and live streaming. Chris and Jim will be sharing their journey, their insights, and their top tips for creating synergy between podcasting and live streaming. So get comfortable, prepare to be enlightened, maybe grab a snack or two, and look forward to this episode brimming with valuable takeaways. So let's dive into the world of bridging broadcasts and uniting podcasting and live streams together. So if you don't know Chris and Jim, I just want to introduce you guys really quick. So Jim is the president of Fusion Marketing, and he's a seasoned digital marketing consultant and retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel with over 30 years of business and social media expertise. Jim has a unique approach to marketing that fuses the Marine Corps leadership with next-level digital marketing, offering his clients a perspective that sets him apart from the rest. And if you don't know Chris, let me introduce you to him as well. He's got 25 plus year. I guess he started when he was like 8 in the music industry with Sony. He's driven and he's a passionate entrepreneur. Chris Stone has founded the podcast and live streaming consultancy Cast Ahead after the success of his own co-hosted podcast, How They Changed His Life. And at Cast Ahead, Chris thrives on enabling driven entrepreneurs, influencers, and thought leaders and enterprises to express their story and elevate the reach. You guys, I'm so excited, both of you together. Good friends. We talk a lot offline, so thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you, Jeff. Man, we can't. You know this is the best show on the interwebs. I say it and I mean it, and we're honored to be here. And hopefully we can, continue to serve your community. And looking forward to chopping this up. And if anybody's got any questions, this is the greatest part about this show is I know when I ask a question or when I have anything that I want to know about the wonderful guests that show up on the show, it's going to get heard, it's going to get seen, it's going to get answered. And that's one of the greatest parts about the show is it's so you can get involved. There's so much engagement. So we're happy to be here, man.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it. And one of the reasons is because Chris will keep hounding you if you don't answer his questions in the chat.
That's right. That's right.
What happens. Yeah. I do want to bring up one of our friends and one of my good friends. Peg Fitzpatrick is here. She's saying, good morning, here to learn about live streaming. So for Chris, I want to say, Peg and I have been doing live streaming since the Google Plus days. So there you go. Ooh. Take your drink. there we have it.
Cheers.
So,
I knew that was coming. I picked up my coffee cup. And I knew that was coming.
So, before, we're talking about live streaming, and one thing I want to do is talk about, what I use, and they sponsor the show, and I'm really appreciative of them. They're our friends over at Ecamm. That's what we produce the show. I know you guys use them as well for a lot of things, but you can find out more about them at socialmedianewslive.com/Ecamm. They actually have a new show right now coming up that's been launched it's not a new show, it's the new season of the show, and you can find it at youtube.com/Ecamm Live. It is Demo Mode Pros with Alicia Way, and Alicia is going to be on the show with us next week, but it's a great show. Make sure you guys go check that out over on YouTube. They have new episodes weekly. So let's talk about what everyone's here, and we're talking about bridging broadcasts. So I want to know for you guys, to understand podcasting and live streaming, and you have people who are from both camps. Like, I'm just a podcaster. I don't want to do any of this video stuff. And other people are saying, well, why don't you do them together? You have more bang for your buck, all this stuff. So I'll start with you, Chris. Can you explain the main difference between podcasting and live streaming, and why a content creator might choose one over the other?
Yeah, I think most of the time when somebody does what's called a podcast, that word it's kind of gotten a little bit blurry in terms of what it means, especially now that YouTube is really in this, and so sometimes you'll see something that they consider a podcast and is on their platform called a podcast, and you're like, well, this just seems like a video. It doesn't really, like, why are they calling it a podcast? And I think it's sort of training people to think that a lot of things are a podcast. And some other people who have been in the podcast industry, like you're talking about, for a number of years, think of a podcast as, audio only, that you're playing, that you're taking and putting on something that's called an RSS feed that somebody's listening to. And I think a lot of times when I look at this, it just really depends on who you're serving. So if you're someone that, Jim and I, when we go live on Amazon and we do an interview like we're doing right now, we know that we plan this sort of run of show out. We know that this portion of it is going to be an interview like we're talking right now, just like Jeff right now has it marked, and he calls, I'm firing up the podcast machine, and he knows that he can go into that and he can pull that content down and be able to use it in a myriad of different ways, one being audio only, and putting that onto an RSS feed, which basically puts it on Spotify, puts it on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts, all the players, right? And so that's really what I call a podcast. It's not necessarily just audio or just video. It's really both. And then when we're talking about a live stream, the way I look at a live stream is, Jim and I will go live and we'll do demonstrations of how to set up a podcast, right? Or, and people are engaging like they're engaging now. We see Jim, we see Randy, we see you, Peg, and we see all these people coming in and having these comments. And so we're actually doing this sort of solving all these people's problems live. And hey, what about this? What is an XLR? What does that stand for? What is this, that, and the other? All of that kind of stuff, probably not going to make a great podcast, right? But what you're able to do is you're able to take that content, and if it's not great for an audio podcast, you can still use it. You can use it for Amazon product videos, chop it up and put it on YouTube. It really becomes something that you can use and also engage with people live at the same time. So that's kind of how I look at the difference between what is a podcast and what is a live stream, and the advantages really of both. We can, chop that up and kind of talk about what that, means depending on what type of content creator you are and who you're serving.
Well, Paul, Paul's big live streamer. Like we talked about it before, he has a huge one with his powwows.com, and also you're launching a podcast too as well, aren't you? Or you did a podcast that was on Facebook that's continues.
Our podcast was on Facebook for a while. We still have our show, and I guess it's one of the questions I have for you guys is, because we just take our live stream and repurpose it for the podcast. But as you guys repurpose video, have you found that there are different topics that are better suited for one platform or the other? Obviously a product demo is better suited for a live video, but have you found other topics resonate better on one platform or the other? Are there tips you can give some of these creators to help them decide where they put their content?
Jim, let's start with, let's go with you, and then I'll bounce back over to Chris, because I'm sure he has some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, because so like one thing we do, like Chris mentioned, when we do, like, say it's a show, it's just me and Chris, and we're talking about products or whatever, we don't think about making that into a podcast because it's really much more of a visual medium. We're showing things, we're demonstrating things. But when we do interviews on Amazon, and like next week we're actually going to be interviewing Roger Cloud, right? That is going to be a conversation. We are going to be able to turn that into a podcast. But the beauty of having the live stream piece of it is we can engage with the community. We can engage with people that might have questions about cloud microphones or the cloud lifter. And so that's where I think you have to think about, how can I explain this, what's going on visually in an audio sense that it makes sense. And I think that's not always easy. And I think sometimes when Chris edits our podcast, I'm sure there's parts of the video that he's cutting out because it just doesn't necessarily make sense. And so I think that's part of the challenge. But I think that really interview type shows, whether it's, like this one today where we've got 4 folks on, I think those work well as a podcast. But I also think there's a lot to be said for having the video component, because one, you can repurpose it. Where I've seen a lot of people, struggle, they're like, well, I don't know if I want to do video. Like I would just talk to a local podcasting company, and they do a daily podcast for a local paper, right? And it's like, well, why not do some video and make that the teaser that gets people to go listen to the rest of the story if they don't want to do a full video? I think that, people are more into this like bite-sized consumption of content, that it's kind of like it's the hook. Oh, I got to hear more. And I think that's where, as Chris and I have worked together on Dealcasters, which next month is 3 years, it's hard to believe. We've evolved how we handle the show and where we put things. And I think where I think a lot of people are like, oh, I just want to be on a podcast player. And then like, well, why can't I get anyone to listen to my podcast? Because you're not creating content that drives people to go listen to it. And I think that's part of the challenge.
That's really interesting. So one of the things, I did when I started my first podcast was the Manly Pinterest podcast. And you think Pinterest is all visual, and like, how is that a podcast? But we made it work, and I would coach the guests beforehand. I'm like, listen, this is a podcast, so if you're going to talk about something visually, you need to describe it like the studio of the mind, and really kind of do that. So I think it can work. It was a lot harder, and some of them I didn't release as a podcast because it was just like, they brought up screen shares and we were like doing things and like critiquing people's pins. But so, Chris, what are some of the unique challenges that you faced, both podcasting and live streaming? Because you've done both, and you actually produce both for clients. And Jim kind of touched on a little bit that, some people don't feel comfortable doing the camera stuff. And I know you just had, I don't know if you can talk about it or not, but you just had somebody really famous in your podcast, on a podcast you produce, and he said, I don't want to be on camera, which to me would be a huge downer because he's so famous and well-known and all that kind of stuff. So what are some struggles that you've had to overcome on this front?
Yeah, personally with my journey, I'm like Alec Johnson and Ian Anderson Graham are recovering perfectionist, and so live streaming really helped me power through that. And my earliest live shows are an absolute train wreck. And because of my recovering perfectionism, I was like, I'm going to go back and take those down, but I leave them up. I absolutely leave them up, and I'll even go back and watch and have a little cringe fest because I think it's important to realize how far you can come and be able to, if I'm out here telling people they got to go through these reps and get better at what they're doing and get past their perfectionism, I can't go back and take that stuff down. It's just like, this is your proof, right? This is how terrible I was when I went live for the first time. But my second show got better, my third show got better, but I don't that's kind of like my personal sort of journey, and like specifics, I don't really have them, but I can tell you specifically what you're talking about, Jeff, is one of the shows that I produce is actually more of a regional county-based podcasts. And I think a lot of people realize, like, hey, if I'm going to do a show, it has to be the Chris Stone show, or this is what I do. I'm a podcaster, so it's something about podcasting. It's like, you don't have to do a show necessarily about what you do, but if you do a show, people will hear you, people will see you, and people will eventually trust whatever you're doing. And so this show is actually based in an independent mattress store in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And these two gentlemen are really, really great in their community about giving back to nonprofits and charities. And so they have this show, and they shine a light on these small businesses and these nonprofits and these charities. And every show they give money to these charities, and they have this huge community of people that support all of this. And they talk about the best restaurants, and so I love doing that show, because for me, I feel great about doing it. And we just recently had on their 100th episode, Bret Michaels, the lead singer of Poison.
Right.
He is from Central Pennsylvania, and he did an interview with them on the show. And when I first approached these guys and we were talking about doing what we were doing, they assumed that they were going to be doing a video podcast that would be audio. So it would be more of an asynchronous thing. And I said, we're doing this live. And they were just like, they were a little horrified, mostly surprised, and tried to understand like how this was all going to work. And we've built this community together on this platform. So every time when we go live, they're doing giveaways, they're doing all kinds of stuff, because they've built this amount of people that join every single week. They have super fans that show up, just like for this show. We have super fans, whether it's Peg or Gary or me or whomever, showing up every single week that we can, or finding it on replay, which we should also talk about and how that works. And I'd love to be able to answer Paul's question a little bit more specifically as far as what content works for audio versus video and all of that. But I think is sort of a long-winded answer to what you're saying is like, listen, if you think going live is really just, you don't know what it's going to do it and then see what it's going to do for you, because this is a way for you to put yourself out there as you. I think a lot of people have a trust issue with all of these produced videos and all of these edited videos. And listen, I'm a video editor big time. Like I've chopped up videos for clients, and then I give it to them and they love it. And I was like, hey, guess what? It doesn't seem like you. It doesn't seem like you. You got to do some stuff that feels like you. Like you got to give somebody like, hey, here's my messy drawers on the floor every once in a while. And here's me saying once in a while. And here's me dropping the phone or whatever. Not doing it on purpose, obviously, but be okay with that kind of stuff every once in a while. It's not that big of a deal.
So I do want to go back and talk about, what works and what doesn't, because I know Jim kind of answered that, but Chris, I want you to as well. But Connor has a great question over here from WDW Opinion. By the way, go check out Connor's site. He's an amazing travel agent. He says, consistency is important for podcast growth. If you do a live stream, but not each episode works for repurposing to a podcast feed, would that inconsistent schedule hinder the growth of a podcast? That's a great question, because you guys both mentioned that sometimes the Dealcasters show can't be doing one. Like if you're doing a wrap up of Prime Day deals or whatever, and that's not going to be really a good podcast probably, because it's just like, here's products and we're going to kind of go through them. So what would you tell Connor about the podcasting schedule? I'm going to go with Jim first and then bounce back to Chris, and you can kind of wrap that question up.
Yeah, so Chris will probably agree with me on this, but in our case, I guess you could say, Connor, we're guilty as charged when it comes to Dealcasters. We're not consistently like every week, like, oh my gosh, we've got to get someone scheduled. We've got to do a podcast. So we'll have some gaps. But I think because we have the video and we are able to, kind of keep teasing stuff out there, I don't think people always realize that, oh, well, they haven't had a recent episode of their podcast in 3 weeks or 2 weeks. So I think it can work. I think what happens, though, is maybe, and this is from going to some of these podcasting conferences, is people are so concerned about monetizing their podcast, about getting downloads, that they get more focused on that as opposed to putting out good content. And so I think it really, it's a long game no matter how you look at it. If you start to see that, hey, I really like having this podcast, then you're going to adjust your workflow to do that. The truth of the matter is, I think, what is it, like there's less than 500,000 podcasts that have released an episode in the last 90 days out of the millions of podcasts that there are. So I think, and you could say, I'm going to do a podcast monthly. So if you can get some sort of consistency, I think that helps, but I don't think it's going to crush you if you miss a couple weeks, or maybe you start to batch them first before you start releasing the podcast, so that you can, it's like, okay, I'm going to put one out every 2 weeks, because I know somewhere in there I'll be able to keep that flow going of having, a couple out there and some in the can, as opposed to like putting that pressure. Oh, I got to have something out every week. I got to have something, I guess some people do daily podcasts, but that's kind of my thoughts on it. And I think that's because I come more from the live streaming side, and I've just seen that having a podcast, it's another channel that allows you to reach more people.
Chris, what about your thoughts on this?
Yeah, Connor, I think you're on the right track in terms of consistency. I think consistency is not just important because you get found better if you're more consistent on the platform and you're showing up for people, and your downloads are going in the right direction. This is basically, what I see with every one of my clients. If your consistency is ebbing and flowing, so will your downloads. But we don't chase downloads. So the consistency, your inability to be consistent will affect that. But I think your inability to be consistent also affects your ability to get better as a podcaster. So to Jim's point, I think one thing three of my clients, like, nobody's working next week. Okay. It's 4th of July. And not many people are going to be listening to podcasts. At least we don't think, but maybe. But I can promise you there's going to be shows next week. And so they're already done. They're in the can. They're ready to broadcast. They're up on platforms. They're ready to be launched. They're batched, to Jim's point. And you don't have to do the same show every time. This is one of the great beauties of podcasting, is that you can change the rules a little bit depending. You make sure you're serving your audience still, but you don't have to have an interview with a guest every single time you do a podcast. Do a solo episode. Say, this was on my mind. I want to be able to talk to my community. And then batch that episode or keep it ready, because you're going to, I don't have a guest this week. All right, I have an episode here where I talked about this. Let me throw it up on the platform. Have it, you can replay it live as a broadcast. Jump into the chat if people have questions or whatever. I don't like that whole sort of I'm live, but I'm not really live thing from a batched episode. I like to be upfront with people. Like, this is a pre-recorded episode, but if you got any questions, let me know. We'll make sure we get to you. So I don't know if that helps, but if you batch your stuff and you think about the consistency, it's okay. One of my clients went through major knee surgery, and he was out for a month, and we batched interviews and we batched solo episodes, and we had the whole thing planned out, and he went and never, had to worry about his show, and he stayed consistent, and that growth continued.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, that's the cool thing is you can make it work for you. And we've done the same thing here. The only time was like a couple weeks ago when my power went out and I couldn't do anything. There wasn't any chance to batch, but a lot of times we'll record something and we'll say, hey, this is a pre-recorded show, and let it go. And it gives you that breathing room, a vacation room, and it just takes a little bit of it planning. And most of the time, if you are consistent, your audience is super forgiving about that kind of stuff. They understand that you want to take a break and, go on a cruise or whatever. So, Paul, you had a question, speaking of cruises, but
So, one of the things, live streaming is my comfort. That's where I, started and where I come from. And so one of the things I struggle with is we talked about it already. It's easy on a live stream. We get questions popped up. It's easy to engage with the audience and bring them in. But how do you do that with a podcast? And, how does that audience engagement work on different platforms?
That's a great question. Jim, you'll go, and then I'll wrap it up with Chris again.
Yeah, I think because we always think live stream first, the podcast is what we take out of the live stream. We haven't run into that. We have not, purposefully said, hey, we're going to create a podcast first episode as an example, with Dealcasters. So we've been like you, Paul, where we're live, we're getting that interaction. So I haven't had that feel. Now I did previously do a podcast with Christian Karasevich. It was called Launch Your Live, and we did about 50 episodes together. And that was truly a podcast, but we would do interviews with people where we were doing them on YouTube, but they weren't live. And so I don't like that as much either from the perspective. I do like having that audience engagement because people, like even today, ask good questions that you maybe wouldn't have thought of if you're just doing that episode, kind of in the vacuum. So that's where I think too, right? We've got like this, especially with what YouTube is doing, kind of this world is changing of where video is getting more involved in how people are going to process things. Or then you'll have people say, like, well, I'm going to do a podcast. I want to have some video, but I don't know if I want to use the video, right? So they're recording it. They're not using that dynamic of live audience engagement. And I would say, even from the perspective of when you listen to a podcast, unless you're going to like contact the host or whatever, there's really, from my perspective, there's not a lot of engagement with a podcast host unless they have some other way for you to engage with them with a community or whatever.
So, Chris, what are your thoughts on this engagement aspect, live versus podcast, or if you can have a live streaming, you mentioned taking the audio and playing, that's what we do here. What are your thoughts on engagement in that medium?
Yeah, it's much more asynchronous, right? So if somebody's listening to a replay of your interview with Jim and Chris, and it sparks a question, you may hear from them, but chances are it's like maybe they're listening to it on their commute and or on their run or whatever, and they just were like, maybe they get one thing out of that podcast and they use it, but they're not. It's a little bit more difficult for them to sort of communicate. Some people, they prefer it because they just are not comfortable in the, maybe they don't even understand like what's going on with the live thing. Where do I watch it? Like, it's hard to believe that here we are in 2023 and that's the situation. But we have this curse of knowledge that we think everybody knows about live video and where to go and has a YouTube channel and has all this stuff. But most people don't. Like, they just don't understand. This is why when you use the word podcast, they think of what looks like that's on CNN, or like, hey, I was watching this podcast and I was like, where were you watching it? And I was like, it was on TV. It was like that, and my brain starts tweaking out. It's like, that's not a bot. No, you can't. You just, it's a curse of knowledge where it's like, listen, we've had years of building to this on Google Plus where we've lived this thing. And we can't assume that everyone knows that. And so some people are just now coming in and listening in a more intimate fashion to your audio podcast. And I think one really underrated thing about podcasting in both places, okay, and that means you're going live or you're doing a pre-recorded episode on video, but you're also putting it in an audio place. And if you're going live, I used to think when people were chiming in that like during the interview, don't mention Jim's name and Peg's name and Connor's name. Like, don't mention them, right? Because, these people are going to tune out. Here we are, we're 28 minutes into this show. These people are here, right? And if they're listening 20 minutes into the show, it doesn't matter that I said someone's name. And in fact, the most underrated part about the podcast is if they catch you on audio and they hear you talking to people and they know that this show's live, they're going to come back and find you on video. They're going to maybe follow you and subscribe to you on YouTube and then get reminders and join the video later. And if you talk about your audio version of the podcast on the video, they're going to subscribe to you on Apple Podcasts and listen to you when they, on audio on their commutes, because they like to do that too. So you got to use both to promote each other.
See, I think that's a great point. And one of the, Luria Petrucci, who we've had on here, who's a big YouTuber, great live streamer, she sets up her show very structured, and I kind of use some of her elements where usually we have a section where we talk. My show usually has 3 sections, and then I try to bring in questions as well. She does it in a certain section so she can chop out those parts of her audio if she wants to, or make a YouTube video out of it. So that's an option as well. I kind of go to the thing like Chris was just saying, where people like to listen to the show because of convenience, or they can't make it at this time during the Friday where I try to keep it consistent, and so they like to listen to it. But I think it's an advertisement, like, come in and listen to the show, because we will try to answer your questions, and we will try to bring up the things that matter to you. In fact, I wanted to bring up Randy's question to this point. She goes, also watching live is way cooler. So I would agree with you, Randy, as well. But Jim has this great question, and this is what I love about the live show and even the podcast audio, because I don't take it out, because I think my audience asks great questions. And Jim says, I was working with a duo who was convinced that their show had to be live same time each week, exactly 60 minutes and 13 episodes as a season, just like TV. Does any of that work on podcasting? Now, I think episodic content and seasons, a lot of podcasters do that. Michael Hyatt has done that, so they can release it like that. But Jim, Chris, what do you think about this? And then we'll go to Jim. Can you be too structured and then like suck all the joy out of podcasting? I don't know. What are your thoughts of Jim's question?
Yeah, I do. Listen, and I don't want to speak for Jim here and whoever he was working with. It depends on, the show itself. If they feel like their audience is better served in sort of this episodic way and launching things in season, and they have gotten that feedback and they see the data as this is helping them, okay. I just know myself, number one, you don't number your episodes. You don't, no one cares necessarily about this season 1 of Dealcasters, right? It's just like, there's no point. Like, I work at it from a standpoint of nobody knows who I am. And they found this show and they hit play. And so the first thing they want to know is, it's what Kirk Nugent talks about, station identification, right? You're here, this is the show, this is for this person, and you're going to get this, okay? That person hears that, station identification, right? You're sitting in a plane. This plane's going to Orlando. Whoops, I'm supposed to go to Vegas, right? I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what you do the first time you hit it. Don't say, hey, and like, this is season 2, episode 428. People are like, what am I supposed to be here? Like, who are you serving? Who am I talking to right now? And so I think it's really important that you look at that first and you say, this is who this show is for. This is what I'm hoping to accomplish with it. And the things like seasons and episode numbers and things like that, like we just did this episode number 100 and it was a big celebration and everything. Okay. 16 episodes from now, we're not talking about episode 116. We're just not. It was a moment to where we could just celebrate. And so it gave us the excuse to be able to celebrate that. And maybe a podcaster can say, hey, this is my end of season spectacular. Okay. And that if that means something to the audience and you feel like you're going to get engagement, go for it, and do it if you feel like it's going to serve your audience.
So Jim, what are your thoughts on this question that Jim had?
I agree. I agree a lot with Chris on this. I mean, even, especially like the Tim and Jim show, in August is our 5-year anniversary, but we're not going to say, hey, this is episode number umpty frats. We kind of use that time space of, hey, we've been doing this for 5 years, because there's been a couple times, right? We've had some weeks where maybe we didn't have the show because of a holiday or things that come up. So I don't think people sit there and like, well, how many shows did they actually do? And I think where seasons maybe make sense, especially if it's more like, say for an example, because I know football season's coming up. Maybe you have a podcast that's about football, right? And so maybe you're starting with the preseason and then you end it when the playoffs end. That makes sense to me, right? Like you could do it that way. But I would agree with Chris. I don't really think it matters that, if that's what people want to do, because that's when they like to take a break. Right. And I think that's what people use it for is, like I know our friend Megan Powers has seasons, but I know she takes a break before she starts her next season. And so I mean, for some people that works, and
yeah, I think it's a great way to do it. And I know why Michael Hyatt did it as well, is because it was, season 1's over, be ready for season 2. That's when they're batching it, and then they can release it and have that break after they release it. So a question, we have such great questions from our audience before we move to this next section, because I think this is really important. A lot of people who are wanting to do live video, this is a big fear, or they started and they're having this issue. So Randy goes, any tips on how to handle trolls when going live? So, Jim, I know people are always, probably trolling you, but what are your suggestions?
I mean, we may get trolls, but my suggestion is I just ignore them. I don't care. They don't bug me. Eventually we'll delete the comment, we'll block them. I don't engage with them. I don't give them the time of day. That's my perspective on trolls, because I think if you let the troll get into your head, it's going to affect how your show is going. And you have, like, right now, you have all these great people here in the comments that we're here to serve them. We're not here to serve somebody that wants to ruin everybody else's entertainment and enjoyment of the show.
Right. So, Chris, what's some of your advice? Just ignore them. Let the community take care of them?
I think most of the time you're ignoring them. They just want the attention, right? They want to see you be affected by what they've said, and don't let it affect you, right? And so it takes a number of trolls. And there's some people, and Jim and I have been lucky. I don't know, it's maybe because we're two 50-plus-year-old knuckleheads. We don't get as many of people that say really ugly, nasty things that we've heard and seen on other people's live streams. And, but we can learn from them, and what they've told us is like, they're going to say, oh, it looks like somebody here is being naughty in the chat, so let me just block them, and we're going to move on and continue. And so that does two things. It gets rid of the troll, but it also lets other people know, hey, this person's looking out for me here. Like this is still a place. It's still a great place for us to do it, and they're not going to allow this. And lots of times, what you see, if you build a community like you have here on this show, if a troll jumps in and starts doing it, your community will probably start bashing them. Right. And so you do want to get rid of them, because you don't want, that's another thing that, like, you can't control really your community engaging with a troll on your chat. Right. Mm-hmm. But you can kick that troll out of the chat. Right. And so, you don't want that to go on too much in that chat, but it does make you feel good as a host that, like, hey, my people got my back in the chat while I'm doing, this interview or whatever you're doing.
Yeah. So Paul, I want to go to you, because one of the things I was thinking when Chris was talking was, like, trolls probably scale, and you have millions of people watching your live stream. So Paul is a big deal. I'm just lucky enough that he comes on this show and hangs out with me. So Paul, how do you handle it? Do you have moderators that you engage with that? But I'm just fascinated, like, how do you handle this with millions of people watching a live stream?
And in our community, we deal with a few issues that are a little more sensitive. So we have political issues, we have racial issues. So we get this. And I couldn't put the trolls we get into two categories. One, there's just the people that, like what we're talking about, they're just in there to get attention. And so my advice to that is ban early and often, and just get them out. We have other people that are legitimately mad, angered, upset about an issue, and they may not know how to answer it. I may still end up banning those people, but at times we will address what their underlying question is. On a live stream, if it's a show like this, we'll talk about it. Not maybe to give them any air, but to at least address what's going on in the chat, and make sure that whatever that underlying issue is, we can answer the question and move on. On our powwow live stream, yes, we have moderators that are we have a crew that's looking at those and monitoring the chat, but we do rely on our audience, like Jim and we're talking about, is hopefully your community is at such a place where they'll kind of take over and let me know if I miss, if I'm not paying attention or whatever, and I miss something. They're the ones that will alert me sometimes, and they're the ones that kind of will turn on those trolls and really help you out.
That's cool. So I'm going to go to the next section, because I could stay on this one all the time. As you know, I like to go down rabbit holes, but I want to talk about reach, and I'm going to go right back to Paul, and then we'll go back around the circle, because of Paul's, he has a huge amount of reach. I mean, millions of people watch his live stream. That's a big amount of reach. So have you thought, and have you seen the way your podcasts and how content creators can leverage both podcasting and live streamings together? Like our friend Lou Mangello, like, he has a huge podcast, but he also does really great engagement on his Wednesday night live show, where he talks about his podcast or does stuff with the community, invites them to other events that he's having. So I can see some of those things. So how do you do it, Paul, leveraging, both those two together to maximize that reach?
Yes, for me, our live stream, our powwow live streams are kind of where we want our audience to end up. That's our end goal. with these kind of platforms. So that's where we're driving, and we're using the podcast, or we're using our weekly live show to talk about those and drive the community to our big powwow live streams. And so the podcast or whatever, I just kind of feel like it's a calling card, or just a way that we can use different platforms to build the community and then drive people to our bigger live streams. But I'm really curious to hear what you guys have too. How does the podcast drive reach to the live stream for y'all? How do you view it differently than that?
Yeah, Jim. So I want to, you can talk about Jim and Chris show, because those both a podcast and a live stream, right? Too. Right. So how are you using those together?
I think when we started, it was more like, because the truth of the matter is, if you go up to people and it's like, hey, have you heard of the Amazon influencer program or an Amazon live stream? You get that dog look, like, what? And we've been doing it for 3 years. And so that, by creating the podcast and getting it out there and being able to go to, these podcast conferences, it's like, yeah, we have a podcast and it's based off of our show. In fact, Jeff, you were on the panel with us where we talked to people how we were repurposing our live stream into a podcast. It allows us to have, the show notes and describe what we were maybe talking about during the show. And then we also have the link to where people can go watch it, whether it's on our YouTube channel or whatever. So I think for us, the podcast is more about building awareness, as opposed to, it just becomes another channel where, hey, what's this Dealcasters thing? And because we talk about tech. And so I think it drives people to maybe want to watch it, going back to what people were talking about. And then they can see our other episodes where we're just specifically, it's just me and Chris talking and demonstrating these things, as opposed to making every live stream a podcast.
So, Chris, I want to talk about this with your clients and how you do it, because you also have multiple clients that are live streams and podcasters. Do you have one that are just one and not the other, or is it, and how do you see the maximizing reach? Is there people who just podcast and that's all you do is produce their podcast and they don't have a live show?
Most of them do a live show, and we repurpose that live content into a version that was on the live stream as an audio podcast. And Jim touched on it. The biggest thing, especially at the levels that we're working in, is the number one thing is people know that you're not, when you start launching podcasts on an audio player or even on video, it doesn't make you money. Okay. And I think everyone needs to know you got to put in work, and it's a cost center for you. It's a marketing thing for you. And so the number one thing is, when you launch a podcast, Google loves it, right? And so as long as everything's connected on your back end and you've got a website and all of those things, your SEO is going to be like holy guacamole, right? You're going to be like, I used to type in Dealcasters into a Google browser and you got to page 10 before you saw our podcast. Now, there's 10 pages of us. And so you can't, that can't be understated. Is getting found is a big deal. And so because we have multiple versions, and the clients that I serve have multiple versions of it, we're just putting it out there saying, hey, if you consume it this way, this is for you. If you'd rather watch a show and see it on replay or engage live, here it is. And you could subscribe and you'll get a live bell and do all of the things. If you'd rather listen to it, it's here for you as well. And so, I'm not saying that you shouldn't maybe alter things, for a particular platform. But what I would never suggest is, if you're going to be on 9 platforms doing 9 different things, is probably not going to be efficient for you. So the way that I've always felt like the way to do this is to create a show that serves people live, but also can be taken and serve other people on replay, either in an asynchronous community fashion as an audio podcast, or on Facebook, on social media, all of those things, so that if somebody's more comfortable watching a video on Facebook, they can jump in, make comments, like it, and watch and listen. And another thing I just wanted to make mention of is, lots of times we look at views and likes and all the social proof for all of these things, and we think, God, what am I doing here? What am I doing? Trust me, they are watching. They are watching. They are listening. It takes a lot for someone especially here. And thank you for, Peg and Jim and Randy, all these folks that are making comments. Do you realize it takes a lot for someone to sit for 45 minutes or an hour to watch and to listen to this content? It takes even more for them to have the guts to open up their phone and type a question in and want to learn something. So when that happens and you're a live streamer, you're a host, shower that person with love, because those are your people. Like, welcome. This is great. How else can I serve you?
That is, you're preaching to the choir, but that is good stuff to hear. Yeah. And earlier on, Jim, we talked about maximizing reach, but Jim, we talked about repurposing, and I know Chris and Jim both do that. I mean, I actually based a lot of how I lay out my repurposing based on what I've seen Chris do with his video editing skills. And
you're influencing me now, brother. There's a lot of stuff I'm like, man, you're getting too good.
Big deal, yeah. So that's what happens. You iron sharpens iron. But Paul, you had a great question too that I wanted to make sure you had time to ask.
Yeah, you guys kind of alluded to using different things in your live stream to help maybe get people to the podcast, or talking about things in the podcast to get them over to your lives or your product demonstration. So can you give people out there that are struggling with this, what are some techniques we can use to kind of get our audiences to go between the two platforms?
Chris?
I think not being afraid to mention either or throughout the course of your show, but not spending too much time in a live situation, like really going down a particular rabbit hole from a visual. I mean, I think a lot of times, we'll do a show and, I always pull everything into Descript. It's like everything goes in there, right? And so it allows me to visually see what we were talking about. And then I also have a notepad next to me, and I was like, okay, at minute 24, we did something highly visual here. This isn't going to work for the podcast audience, right? Even at minute 24, though, if they're already there, as long as you're not spending too much time saying, okay, look at this, and then do this, but you're not giving in some audio that gives it some context to a listener. Also, keep in mind, a lot of times right now, someone's multitasking. Randy might be hammering out a blog while she's listening, but doesn't really, can't really stand this knucklehead on the screen currently. But so she might be multitasking. I do it all the time. I'll watch the show on Friday and I'll be in the middle of doing some sort of visual editing or whatever, but I'm listening, right? And so I think that's another thing we got to think of. It's not just video. It's not just audio. Sometimes on the video, they're only listening. And I think that's increasing, especially lately, as YouTube is rolling more and more into podcasts.
That's a great point. So, like, one of my favorite podcasts was Smartless. I like to listen to it. Eric Fisher introduced me to it. And then all of a sudden they came out with a video. They have season 1, like on HBO Max, where you can actually watch them filming the live version of their road tour show, which is great. They combine things together. You can watch visually, you can listen to it. So Jim, do you have any things that you've seen to do what we've been talking about, like using this to increase reach? Like, if you don't want to listen to podcasts, I've been using my podcast for this show actually to do a little pre-roll before them, saying, hey, thank you guys so much for watching, but also, hey, I've got this course coming up, and or this happened. I'm sorry that I didn't come on last week because we had the power outage, and talking to them a little bit, like Chris was saying earlier, there's something intimate about being in their ear. So what are your thoughts to kind of merge the two together, Jim?
Well, I think the biggest thing that, and you have to remember, Dealcasters started on Amazon. We had no other platforms that we were on. So we started building out the social channels. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle. I think it's important to take those short clips, whether it's out of the live, and make it into shorts, make it into reels, post it on LinkedIn as a part of the video, as a native video, and that will get people interested, right? You've got to build that awareness, because it's that whole know, like, and trust thing, right? Mm-hmm. If I don't know you guys, I'm not going to sit there and invest in all that show. But if you take a minute of Chris Stone or Jeff C or Paul saying something brilliant, that's like, you know what, this person, what they're saying resonates with me. I want to go watch more, or I want to go listen to more. And so you can give them those options, right? Because then when they go to that full, oh, this is also a podcast, or, oh, this is a podcast, but I can also watch the video. And that's where I see most people struggle, because they don't want to put the work in to put it out on their social channels. And the platforms tell us what to do, and they're all wanting us to do these short clips. Now, personally, not a big fan of the audiograms, but I know some people do that. I think that the video is putting out a lot more of those. I like to say senses that you don't necessarily catch when it's audio only.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Just to dovetail a little bit, and me, Paul, maybe this helps a little bit more, is that we can't assume that everybody's listened to every minute of every show we've ever done. Okay, and so we just can't, right? And so this is the beauty of having a tool like Descript or some of these others, is like, boy, there's some really great nuggets or excerpts or highlights from episodes that are longer than a minute, right? It's very hard to tell a story in a minute or less. And so we do this because, we create shorts and reels and TikTok and all of the vertical videos. And those are, sort of, you can't tell a story. You can't really elaborate and really. So, but what you can do, and a lot of shows do this, is they create just another YouTube channel that's just the clips, right? Or they create this on the same channel and just put it on a playlist. And it's maybe 10 minutes, regarding leveraging podcasting and live streaming for a wider reach. And then take that and put it up as another audio podcast. And yeah, that entire interview is later, but if you launch it as a podcast, and maybe this helps Connor in terms of batching your content, you can't assume that at minute 38 somebody heard what Jim Fuhs said. But if he said something really juicy and there's a 5-minute excerpt, why not take that? And then you introduce the audio podcast as, hey, I had a great interview with Jim Fuhs, and he talked about how you can leverage your reach. And it's a replay from, the episode 128, which is you can listen to the full interview if you want to do it. So now you're promoting your own episodes, right? But you're actually saying, hey, I want to dust this off, and I want you to hear it, because I feel like, you as my audience can be served, and I will make sure that you heard this. And maybe it promotes the full listen, but it also serves your audience at the same time. There's no rules. We can, a podcast doesn't have to be an hour. It doesn't have to be, whatever. It's however your audience consumes it.
So you could actually release that as let's say this show goes out on Saturday. So maybe I do those clips on Tuesday and have a little extra episode in my podcast playlist. I know, once again, our friend Lou Mangello has started doing that. He's been going back to his archives, because he's been doing it since the dawn of time, when Disney was being constructed, and pulls it out and talks about something that he knows will resonate with the audience, which I think is a genius way to do it. So speaking of genius ways to do things, let's go into this next section, which is all about the Dealcasters brand. And we talked about going live on Amazon. That's where they started. And before we go on, I want to make sure to mention our pals at Ecamm. You can find out more about them at socialmedianewslive.com/Ecamm. They actually have some tools that let you go live on Amazon and see the comments. And when Amazon's working, everything can connect. But it's great that they have that option. So if you're an Amazon influencer or a streamer, make sure to check out Ecamm at socialmedianewslive.com/Ecamm. So let's talk about the Dealcasters brand. And Paul, jump in here, because I know you're on Amazon as well, and you got some great questions. But Jim, I want to start with you. Tell us more about Dealcasters. You mentioned it started on Amazon, but why did it start there on Amazon, and what sets it apart from other tech-focused shows?
Well, I think it started because Chris and I had wanted to do something together, and Ross Brand had said, hey, there's this Amazon influencer program. I figured out how to apply, got accepted. And it's like, wow, that was easy. And I said, hey, Chris, we can actually go live on Amazon. And he was like, wow. So it's our sandbox. It's really what we look at it as, because we like to break things. We like to figure stuff out. And so I think that's one way where we're different. And the other thing is, we never looked at it as a, QVC HSN thing. We're Chris has come up with the term, we live solve on our show, right? So we're helping people, overcome that fear of technology, helping them, solve their problems. And then we bring guests on that also, make, just like you like to do, Jeff, we bring people on for free consulting, so we get smarter. And so I think that is where our show, I think, is different than a lot of other tech shows. Like, we're not just there to be all geeky. We like to have fun. We have sometimes, we do some Star Wars themed shows and some
Right.
other things. And,
Yeah.
we've done Dealcasters after dark before and things like that. And who knows, now with the way that the NFL stuff is changing, we may do a little bit more stuff in that realm, because Chris and I both like sports as well. So it's been fun to do that, and I think because we're having fun, people see that, people resonate with that, because it's not like we're this like, oh gosh, we got to do this, and we don't think about, oh my gosh, I got to sell 15 Shure MV7Xs before the show is over or it's a failure. We don't think about those things.
Right. Gotcha. So Chris, what's your origin story? I mean, how did you meet Jim? Was he like, did you see him on the side of the street and felt sorry for him and took him home?
Yeah, I found him on a dating app. Yeah. And no, we met at a podcast meetup that was in Atlanta, and just became fast friends. And we, obviously do some of the same things in terms of remote production. We know we needed to do. We had talked about doing a show, and we just kind of tossing around some ideas. And then when the Amazon approval came in, I was like, this is the place we do this. This becomes a sandbox for us to play in, right? So came up with that idea, just launched ourselves on Amazon, and said, like, Jim has this, Kim Kardashian like network of wonderful people like Jeff C. and Jennifer Watson, and we knew Chris Kermitzos, and we started talking to people that were launching books, like Dave Jackson, who's School of Podcasting, who's like this Hall of Fame podcaster, and he was launching a book, and we were like, well, I wonder if he might come on our show. We only have like 2 episodes. And he said yes, and it was like, okay, this might be a real thing. And we were actually making content we thought was really good. And like I said, it was a sandbox for us to say, okay, we're on Amazon. We got to get people's attention, so we got to do Flash. We got to do some stuff. We got to, the player is muted when people start watching it, so we're going to start doing some unmute graphics. And we were just like, it was all of this, Wild West kind of thing to play with, but we never really said, hey, we're doing this because we want to make money on this platform. And so we were just doing this. We were having fun. We created some product videos. We were doing all this other stuff. And one day we opened up our commission report and we were like, holy, this is
right.
What just happened. And by the time we just kind of figured it out, we said, instead of taking the mindset, the scarcity mindset of saying, ooh, let's not tell anybody, right? Let's just, no, we were like, we got to tell more people about this, because the content at the time on Amazon was not that great, to be honest. I mean, it was like, some of it was some early YouTube hot garbage. And so we were like, if this thing's going to continue for us, we want to make the content on this platform better. So we started talking to people like Professor Nez and Kevin Colby and Gabe Aloisi and Jeff C. and people like that were like, hey, you come on over. I promise you, if you do it this way, you're going to make more money than you do on YouTube. And lo and behold, we weren't wrong. So that's really kind of the way this whole thing launched. And Jim and I, to this date, know that if there's ebb and flows, and there is in your Amazon commission report, because we're not in control, Amazon's in control, they pull all the strings, and we do what we do, and there's tons of people on the platform doing content like we are. We know that we weren't in this to begin with to make money. And so we continue on that mission of like, this is our way to solve people's problems and do what we do as live producers. And so, it's a nice way to kind of monetize yourself, but it's also a nice way to show people what you can do live and create an engaging live show. And they go, I want that. Whatever you did on that episode, I want that for my show. And that's how it sort of kind of took off, I guess.
Well, you guys are the ones who showed me. I mean, I had a storefront for, I was in the influencers program just because I wanted the storefront back in the day, and then started going live. And then you were like, oh, by the way, you need to do these product videos. And so you evangelized to me, and then I got Paul actually to start doing it. And he's got a KDP notebook coming out like in the next couple days. I mean, he's going to town on there. So Paul, I know you had some questions as we wrap up the show, because I could talk about this all the time, but go
yeah,
ahead.
I mean, watching some of you guys' product videos, and your live shows, and getting to see you guys play with tech at PodFest. I'm really jealous because you've gotten to experience so much cool stuff. So if somebody's new to Dealcasters, what are some episodes they should go back and watch? What have been some of your favorite things to get to review and look at?
Jim, I'll go with you first because you look like you have the hardest time.
That's a good one. I would say that I think some of our best episodes were like the May the 4th be with you, where we're like playing around with Star Wars stuff. Like I put on a Boba Fett helmet and we pull out lightsabers and all sorts of stuff like that. Those have been a lot of fun. And then we've had some great interviews. We've had people like, Jeff C on, and we just had, James Hicks. I mean, just some really great creators that help other people get better in understanding how you can have better shows and things of that nature. So I think those are, and of course, one of my favorites, but I don't think you can see it on Amazon now. I think you got to go to YouTube, is Jennifer Watson. She's a part of our intro video. She's just so much fun. And we were talking about weather items. Like she was our first interview, wasn't she, Chris?
Yep, she was the first one. She was the one that we were like, whoops, we can't go live at 1080p. We got to dial it down to 720. And she hung out in the green room for 45 minutes. To wait while we got that dialed in. This is a part of live streaming, and thank God that she was so gracious of her time to be able to do that. But yeah, I think more specifically, I guess, Paul, to your question is we do get to play a lot, and we wouldn't do this if it wasn't fun. And, we're in this sort of, I guess, podcasting and live streaming business. But, the brands that we do talk to, we don't just take, when you become an Amazon influencer and people, and your name gets out there a little bit, your inbox gets full of people like trying to give you everything that they possibly, in fact, sending you stuff that you didn't even ask for, showing up, and you're like, I don't know how this got here, but I didn't ask for it. And a lot of it is not great. And so it's important to stay sort of true to your audience, true to your brand. Like if Jim and Chris go live and we're talking about the Shure MV7X that Jim's speaking into today, we use it. We believe in it. This is something that if this works within somebody's budget, we can do that. We've got other microphones around here that are more expensive and less expensive, and we can talk about it. If you want to use the word expert, advocate, influencer, whatever, but we're not just going to talk about something that people go, I don't know if I can trust that. Did you get paid to say that? And, so we're very, very tactical about the brands that we work with. Next week, we're going to have Roger Cloud on from Cloud Microphones, and they make the Cloud Lifter. And everybody kind of knows that as like the device you need if you have this mic, the SM7B, right? But we had a conversation with him, I don't know, probably 6 months ago. And I think we were on the phone on Zoom with him for like 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And he just has all these great stories about, he was in the studio with Pink Floyd and like all of these amazing things. And I'm like, how is this not out there? And he was talking about his company and based in Arizona and what he does for Native Americans in that community and all of the things that, and I'm like, please come on our show. And it wasn't like, please come on our show because we want free cloud lifters, which we get, and that's what you're hearing right now or whatever. It was because like, this is somebody who can speak to our audience. And this is something that I feel like if people find out a little bit more about that backstory for some of these tech brands, I think people are a little bit more, open to it. So yeah, I don't even know if that answers your question.
No, I think it's great because, one of the things we're talking about is about you guys is that you're very sincere. I never watch your live streams. I never feel like, oh, they're just hawking a product. They're like the ShamWow guy, or like, just set it and forget it. It's not like that. It's more of like, hey, I'm using this cloud device. Jeff, you really need to get one because it would help, and that kind of stuff. And they want to share that. And that's what I love about it. It's that marketing that is a service-based, like, yeah, I'm going to make some money, but this really works, and I really like it, and I'm excited about it. So one of the things, and I didn't feel that way, and as we wrap up the show, when it's sponsored by Ecamm, I was a big fan of Ecamm, used their stuff way before they were a sponsor for the show, so I kind of have that kind of same feeling like you had with the cloud microphone, but you can find out more about them, socialmedianewslive.com/Ecamm, and also follow Dealcasters everywhere. Dealcasters.live takes you to their storefront. You can see this stuff that we're talking about. You can see their shows. You can see their special events that they have going on. I'm sure they're going to have some stuff coming out during Prime Day, which is next week,
2
right?
weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
The 11th and 12th.
Yeah. So they're going to be doing stuff over there. See how they're doing it. Watch how Chris and Jim are repurposing their content. It's just kind of it's a masterclass on how to take and compress stuff to a minute and let it go out there. So follow them at dealcasters.live. But Paul, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll go around the room. Where can people find out more about you? Paul, if you haven't guessed, he just is amazing with his live show and the stuff that he's doing at paulgowder.com. But Paul, what do you got going on? Tell us where we can find out more about you.
Yeah, you can learn more about some of the things I'm doing with helping people level up their business over at paulgowder.com. But I also want to encourage you, especially here in the summer, if you're interested in Native American culture, there are tons of powwows going on right now, and they're open to the public. Head over to powwows.com and find one near you.
Yeah, they're amazing. He's an amazing streamer. Chris, another amazing streamer. Tell us where we can find out more about the Chris Stone.
You can go to chrisstone.contact, and I'm on all of the tubes there. And certainly if you're someone who wants to have a show but doesn't want to know how all the sausage is made, I can do that for you.
Awesome. Jim Fuhs, last but not least. Where can we
Yes,
find out about you?
fusionmarketing.live. I just started using beacons. I think it's a really neat link product, and thanks to our friend James Hicks for turning me on to that, and all the places you can connect with me there. And like Chris, if you're looking to do a live show or even turn it into a podcast, definitely like to talk to people about that.
Awesome. And I am Jeff C., and I do have a new course coming out. You guys can sign up for that at jeffc.com/Descript 101. We've talked about repurposing today. If you've been watching some of my reels and stuff, that's what I'm using. I'm doing it all in Descript, and so I'm going to be walking you through that process. If you want more information about that, jeffc.com/Descript 101. Once again, thank you to Ecamm for being a sponsor at socialmedianewslive.com/Ecamm. And with that, we'll see you guys next week. Make sure to tune in, subscribe, check out everybody. Thank you, Peg. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Randy. Everybody who watched live and are listening to us and also coming in during the replay. We appreciate you. We wouldn't be able to do the show without you. And with that, we'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.
Ecamm fam, you already know what time it is. It's summer 2023. And what do we do every summer? We turn up with the Demo Mode Pros. Season 3 is coming, and we have 8 new Ecamm influencers who's going to show you how to do everything you want to do in Ecamm. I'm talking, you don't want to miss this. Every new summer, there's always tons of new features. So if you want to learn how to level up, you might want to tune in. Ecamm fam, let's take it to live demo mode.